let's bring Keith Smith in. Yahoo Sports covers the NBA. NBC Sports Pro Basketball Talk covers the NBA. He's with us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And, Keith, once the Brooklyn Nets get 4 guys, one including Kevin Durant, I mean, do you think that changed the mindset of the league, or are they still business as usual? If they can get the okay from someone to go, that they're going to go?
Well, they're going to go, but they're just not going to get that okay for quite some time. It's going to be a while, and they're not going to go until they get the okay. And really what happens is anytime you get one of these positive tests, it's at least a minimum of a 14-day window that you're going to set everything back by. So now we're 2 more weeks away, which is still within the timeline that they said. They will not start anything up before mid-April at the earliest, but the NBA, through every conversation they've had, they're making arrangements that it's going to be much longer than that. They're just deciding at this point whether they can save this season or some portion of it, or whether it's best to let this one go and start next year on time.
All right, so the possibility of them coming back before June. I know Bobby Marks tweeted this out. We had him on Tuesday's show. He laid out a timeline that I found to be kind of interesting. And it was kind of like a mid-June start of the playoffs. So I want to start there. Do you think the NBA can come right back and just go right into the playoffs? Or do they have to? I mean, there's like 20 games left. Should they, play a couple of those games to get ready? I mean, to come right back and play a 7-game series just seems to be like really pushing it a little bit.
Yeah, no, they'll come back, I would think, and play at least a couple of games to kind of get guys back in the rhythm of playing and come back, because you're going to come right back and jump into the playoffs. Clearly, they're not going to be the immediate playoff intensity like what we usually see, but that's where guys, I mean, we saw this in the lockout season. Guys start having soft tissue injuries and everything else. That's what trainers have told me they're worried about whenever it is that the league comes back is these guys are, even if they are working out, they're not going 100 miles an hour. They're not going 100%. And that's what they worry about is those soft tissue injuries, hamstring pulls, rolled ankles, those kind of things. And that's what takes you out of it. So that's something that I think they're going to be on the lookout for. And I think the league will do something to prep them with, a couple of weeks of games, maybe 4 games for each team or something like that to lead up to it. The teams will treat it almost like a mini preseason, and then that'll get us right into the playoffs. And the question is whether those playoffs are normal 7-game series, abbreviated series, back-to-back during the playoffs, which don't happen. What that's going to look like, that all kind of depends.
Yeah, I mean, he mapped out a mid-June start of the playoffs. Early August would be your NBA Finals. End of August is when your draft starts. September 1st, you're right into free agency. And then you would do a fall league in the early September. Training camp opens 2 months later. And then Christmas Day is when your season opens. And you run that to mid-June. And that's when your season ends. Now, we know that the Atlanta Hawks ownership group basically said, why not do this? Why not start December 25th? Could this whole thing be the template and the precursor to get the NBA on that schedule?
It could be. It could be something that the league says, hey, let's take this adverse situation and try it. One of the things I think we have seen with Adam Silver is he is open to different things and trying different things compared to previous commissioners. The ownership group now is a little younger. It's newer guys who are, in their business world and their business backgrounds are open to, experimentation and trying new things. So I think that is, leading into this world where the NBA isn't going to say, hey, it's always been kind of a October to June sport. Maybe we should be December to August. Maybe that's the better window for us. And I think that's where it'll get really interesting is if they use this as kind of the springboard into, all right, let's try it next year and see what it looks like and then go back. The problem is once you try it, it's really hard to go back the other way unless you're going to do an abbreviated season on one side or another or an abbreviated off season, which that's something they'd have to, all of it really, they have to collectively bargain with the union because it's all going to be open to negotiation. But that's the concern there is, all right, if you don't like that, it's going to do a little bit to unwind it and get it back to the way it has been.
Now, you touched on the direction I wanted to go with the CBA. Isn't there something that protects these players? If the NBA wanted to go and start back up and push this thing into August and September, isn't there something in the CBA that would protect these players to not playing so late if something like this was to occur?
I mean, technically, the players could say our contracts run out on June 30th. That's the league year that we're paid through, and that's where everything ends, and they could push that. That's why, this is why the league is coming out as well as the Players Association, and they're not doing it jointly. They're both doing it separately and saying, we're working together on this. Neither side wants this to go sideways. Neither side wants this to be, contentious at all. We saw this is a league that's 6, months in advance of their collective bargaining agreement being due to come up. They had already, bargained a brand new one and had it already in place and ready to go. So these guys are really, they're working together. They want to make sure everything happens the way it should. So the players could get there, but I don't think it's going to get to that point. They'll have things agreed to and worked out before anybody, is chirping and barking about it.
Yeah. So on the start of Christmas Day and all that stuff, is this something that you think has support? I mean, will people look at this and say, you know what, this actually kind of works, and let's go down that road and let's just stick with this?
Yeah, there definitely is. There's a handful of owners who have that support. Challenge is going to be TV. The TV contracts, especially the regional sports networks, they like having that program midweek in the fall. Because although I know we like to say football is king, football is still centered around Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I know there are the occasional college games that pop up on every day of the week now, but it is really there. On those Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Friday nights, that's where they want to have the NBA games that the TV does, and the regional sports networks want those because they really heavily rely on those. Some of those have overlapping contracts with Major League Baseball. So if you're pushing into basically the bulk of the baseball season, now you're pushing right up against them, and that's going to be an additional challenge of, all right, well, we've got a contract with this team and this team. Right now, there's a little bit of overlap, but not so much that it's not able to be worked around. So that's going to be the challenge, is getting the TV networks to buy in that, all right, we agree that this is the best thing. Now, maybe they do because maybe that gets more eyes on their games. Later when basketball is kind of the only thing going on up against hockey, which doesn't have the national following that the NBA does. So we'll see ultimately where that goes. But there's a lot of hurdles to work through, but there is support from the ownership group. The players have chimed in and seem like they kind of like it. So I think it's at least a conversation point that's going to be heavily discussed.
That's a point that I don't know that it's been brought up, is you're right. I mean, if you're playing NBA basketball games in the middle of the summer, April, May, June, and let's say here locally the Phillies are on NBC Philadelphia, when the Sixers and the Phillies play at the same time, what happens to that other game? There is a secondary channel here, NBC Philadelphia Plus, but I guess those regional networks, that's a great point, Keith, that really hasn't been discussed, of who would win that battle between an NBA team and a Major League Baseball team. So that could be a big hurdle here, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, because neither one's going to want to budge. They both, the RSNs pay a lot of money to both of them. And baseball has historically been what they live off of from really, let's call it mid-April through all the way through the rest of the regular season. And then the NBA slides in there. I know some of them are the same ones that broadcast the National Hockey League, and they'll pick up. But that's where they're going to have to figure that out and make it work, because that's going to be a big question. And I think you ultimately come back to who's the bigger draw. If we're the RSN, who goes to that secondary feed? Who goes, or do you put it on? I know some of the channels where they have overlaps, they put it on a local channel. There you'll see it pop up on like a channel 9 or whatever it is, something like that. So that's going to be something to really keep an eye on here, because they're going to have to figure that out.
Keith Smith, Pro Basketball Talk, NBC Sports, Yahoo Sports, NBA, with us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Your best guess, if basketball comes back, will a building be open for fans to watch? Or are these games, no matter what, regardless if they get this back up on its feet, being played without fans in the building?
All right, much to my mom's chagrin, I am not a doctor, but I'm going to play that a little bit because I think what the NBA is going to do is they're going to default to whatever the guidance is of the medical organizations. If they say you can't have more than 50 people, There's no way to put on an NBA game with less than 50 people. And I know fans are screaming and yelling about that. I hear them every single day on Twitter. But the reality is you're already to 50 by the time you count the players, coaches, trainers, and game officials. That's before you have any broadcasters, that's before you have anything else. And people have said, we'll limit the teams to only 10 players each team. They're not going to completely change the way games are structured and played just to try to get games in. So I think what you're looking at here is they're going to wait. And because of that, I think we're going to see it be held until we kind of get the all clear or mostly clear. I think what you could see is if there's still a couple hot spots in areas where those teams play their home games, maybe those teams are asked to relocate and play somewhere else that's been given the all clear. But once that happens, that's when I think you're going to see it opened up. So because of that, I think you'll only see it when fans are allowed.
Wow, that's interesting because, you had, I guess it was Woj a couple days ago that reported that, that they're working out a plan that games would return without fans, possibly in smaller venues or practice facilities. I know you're in Orlando. I can imagine them using that venue that they play Summer League in, stuff like that. I mean, so that will be it. I mean, the whole thought of playing these games with, I don't know, I'm watching some of these WWE events and there's not anybody in the crowd. It's just bonkers watching them try to do their thing with nobody there. To have the players play with nobody in there, it just seems like it just feels like a lost season without the fans being in the buildings.
Yeah, it does a little bit. Now, and I'm not contradicting anything that Woj is saying. I'm just guessing because I've heard all the same things, that they're looking at every possible avenue. There was discussions talked about, could you take the entire league? But the key here is once everyone is clear, once everyone has been cleared, obviously the 4 Nets coming up positive recently, that throws a wrench in even a crazy plan like this. But could you take the entire league, bring them all to one place, and then you just play games kind of all day? You treat it almost like a summer league type environment where every couple hours you've got a game that goes on, and you've got the team personnel and the players and everything else. Challenge with that is abiding by the 50-person guideline that's out there right now and pretty widely out there, that you got to avoid that. That becomes a challenge with that. But that was something that a handful of people pitched is, could we do this? Could we bring everybody to a secure place and just play games? The challenge is, once you multiply it by 30 teams, that's that many people that you've got to keep track of and everything else, and that starts to get really tricky.
Yeah, there was a report, I guess, today that the season may not begin until Christmas, depending on how long the season is delayed, and that the most, the most aggressive feeling is restarting the season sometime before July. But, I mean, is there, in your mind, a drop-dead date that they just say, season's done?
Yeah, I think they're going to do everything to hold off, but I think if you can't get it started up by towards the end of June to beginning of July, and that would likely be playoffs only at that point, or maybe some minor lead up to it, but really your focus is on the playoffs there. I think at that point you got to say we're out, because now what you're doing is you're basically sacrificing the remainder of this current season to save the entirety of next season. If you start really backing it up and backing it up and backing it up, now what you're going to have is you're going to have players who are going to play with no break all the way through, because you just can't really back up next year to start much beyond Christmas. Maybe you could back it up to New Year's, but even that's going to be a challenge, and that would have to be a shortened season. And I think at some point the league's going to look at it and say, all right, what's best is giving up on this year for an entire next season? Is that what's best, or is what's best is an abbreviated this year and an abbreviated next year? That starts to get really, really tough. So I think that's going to be the question that they're going to be faced with at some point. You also have the reality of the NBA won't care about this, but if the Olympic Games are able to be held and they're going to go on, then what you're going to have is the NBA is going to compete direct head-to-head with the Olympics. The NBA is going to do what's best for the NBA, but that's another consideration that's going to have to be talked around and figured out.
Keith Smith, the NBA is in an uncertain spot, and obviously they were having a great season going on. We were trying to crown probably a new champion this year with the Lakers involved, and the Bucks possibly, first time David in the mix to win a championship in years. By the way, I thought about this today. I was listening I'm reading the Tanking to the Top book, right? And, I listened to Hinkie on an old podcast that he did with Zach Lowe. And in the podcast, he talked about how they ended up getting Embiid. And there's a chapter in the book about how they got Embiid, that the Cavs basically were afraid to take him because of the injury. And people forget that Jabari Parker went in there at number 2 to the Bucks, who are one of the worst teams in the league. Can you imagine if the Bucks had Antetokounmpo and got Embiid in that draft, if they were the ones that said, you know what, we'll take a shot on Embiid because we got 15 wins. Who the heck cares? Could Embiid and Antetokounmpo coexist, or would you have a similar situation of what you have with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid?
I think what you'd have is a line of people from Milwaukee to NBA headquarters in New York basically begging for games to come back to be played. I just think, those two guys are very special. We've seen what they've done as teammates, in the All-Star game. They were able to do some things, and I think that'd be, a real handful for the rest of the league. That's, as we're all seeking ways to fill this downtime with no games to talk about and no real feeling on when the season will come back. Those are some of the things we're looking at. Is maybe we could look at some of the NBA what ifs, and that one's pretty high on the list of things to take a look at.
Yeah, what are some of the things that you're doing with no games that our fans and listeners can kind of follow along and see some NBA stuff?
Yeah, over at NBC Sports, we're doing something really fun right now. We are doing a mock expansion draft. So what we did was Kurt Helen from the team and Dan Feldman, they are going to be each the GMs of 2 new teams that'll be coming into the league. And then what I did was for the 30 teams, I built out the protected list. Teams are allowed to protect up to 8 players. So I built all those out. Those are being posted right now. I believe we're up to 4 of the divisions have been posted. 2 more will post tomorrow. We're going to record a podcast tomorrow where we actually do the expansion draft live with the 3 of us. And I'll be handling, as the teams may be dangling, hey, what about a pick to draft this guy and get him off our books, or not draft this guy so that we can keep him back with us. So I'll be playing that role while Dan and Kurt draft the team. So those are all going up here, and then the podcast will come out, and then we'll have a written recap of the draft as well. So we get that going on, which will be a lot of fun. And then we've got some other things that are loosely planned out for that. That was to get us through kind of week 1 here.
I like it.
Without anything going on.
At Keith Smith NBA to check that out. They got the mock NBA expansion drafts going. Check that out. Pro Basketball Talk, NBC Sports, and Keith Smith talking some NBA as some interesting times. Will they be back? We'll find out. Obviously, the 4 Nets players, Kevin Durant being one of them, and I have a feeling there's, this might not be the last we hear of things going down. We just heard an NHL player today as well. All right, Keith, thanks, pal.
Absolutely, guys. Stay safe.
Keith Smith, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.